Long ago and far away, in enchanted lands across the seas, lived kings and queens, princes and princesses, good fairies and wicked witches, ferocious giants and gentle dwarfs. Their adventures and stories have been told for hundreds of years. Open the pages and listen to the words, and you too can join the magical world of Once Upon a Time. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Once upon a time, there was a happy kingdom, ruled by a courageous king and a beautiful and kind queen. One day, the queen was sitting by her window sewing, while outside the snow was falling. Carelessly, the queen pricked her finger, and a drop of blood fell onto the snow on the windowsill. Oh, how I would like to have a baby girl, with hair as black as this ebony thimble, skin as white as snow, and lips as red as blood, she thought. Before a year had passed, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, with hair the colour of ebony, perfect skin, and blood-red lips, and she called her Snow White. Unfortunately, not long after the little girl was born, the queen died. The king was very sad, but he decided to marry again. He chose a beautiful woman, but she was so vain she couldn't bear to think there was anyone more beautiful. The new queen had a magic mirror, which a very powerful fairy had given to her. Every morning, after dressing herself up from top to toe, she would ask it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And every morning the mirror would reply, "You, O queen, are fair and lovely too. In all the land there is none as beautiful as you." The queen knew the mirror never lied, so she was happy. In the meantime, Snow White was growing up and becoming more beautiful every day. Then one morning, the mirror replied to the queen, "You, O queen, are fair and lovely too, but there is someone 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen ordered the mirror to name the hateful rival. When she discovered it was her stepdaughter Snow White, she was furious. The thought that her beauty was being obscured made the queen mad with jealousy. The queen shut herself in her chambers and plotted. Snow White had to die. She called a huntsman and gave him his orders. "Take Snow White into the forest and kill her. As proof of her death, you will bring me her heart and her liver. Do not disobey me, or you will pay for it with your life." The huntsman led Snow White into the thick of the forest. But while they were walking, he could not help noticing how the young girl smiled happily at the birds and squirrels, and he could not help hearing her beautiful silvery singing. He was spellbound by her beauty. Nevertheless, the queen had given him his orders. He took his knife out of its sheath and raised his arm to strike, but Snow White turned to him with her eyes brimming with tears. "Don't kill me," she said. "I have done you no harm." The huntsman lowered his arm and told Snow White that he was only doing what the queen had ordered. "I don't have the heart to kill you," he said, "but you must promise me that you will hide in the wildest part of the forest and never return home. Otherwise I will pay with my life." Snow White promised. On his way back to the castle, the huntsman killed a fawn and took its heart and liver to give to the queen. Meanwhile, poor Snow White wandered alone through the forest. She was reeling from tiredness and hunger when she spotted a strange little house with tiny windows and doors. She knocked, but no one answered, so she pushed open the door and went in. Inside, everything was spick and span and orderly, but all the things in the house were surprisingly tiny. There was a tiny little table laid with a white tablecloth. On top, there were 7 little plates, spoons and mugs. In the next room, there were 7 little beds. Snow White was too tired to wonder who they belonged to. She went back to the table and ate a morsel from each of the 7 little plates and took a sip of wine from each of the mugs. Then she lay down on one of the little beds and fell fast asleep. 1 hour later, the owners of the house returned. They were 7 dwarfs who went digging in the depths of the mountain for precious stones. They lit their lanterns and quickly realized their things had been disturbed. Someone had been in their home. The first said,
"Who has sat on my chair?
and the second,
Who has eaten from my plate?
and the third,
Who has taken a piece of my bread?
and the fourth,
Who has rumpled my napkin?
and the fifth,
Who has used my little fork?
and the sixth,
Who has cut with my little knife?
and the seventh."
Who has drunk from my little glass?"
Then all together they headed for the bedroom. When they saw Snow White sleeping deeply, they were speechless with amazement. Never had they seen such a beautiful young girl.
"Now what shall we do?"
Said one of the little dwarfs.
"Poor little girl, she seems very tired.
Noticed another.
Let's leave her sleeping."
But with these whispers, Snow White awoke. At first she thought she was dreaming. But then the first dwarf said,
"What's your name?"
and the second,
Where do you come from?
and the third.
Where did you come into our little house?"
Snow White sat up. "My name is Snow White, and I'm the daughter of the king," she told them. "I came in because I did not know where to rest for the night."
Couldn't you return to the castle?"
asked one surprised dwarf. On hearing these words, Snow White burst into tears and told her sad tale. The dwarfs were really shocked when they heard the evil intentions of Snow White's stepmother.
"Why don't you stay and live with us?"
Said the oldest dwarf.
"Right.
Said the second.
You could look after the house while we're away. You could get a hot meal ready for when we come home.
Said the third hopefully.
And keep us company in the evenings.
Said the fourth.
Here, with us, you'll be happy."
The fifth assured her.
"Yes,
Said the sixth.
we're a little grumpy sometimes, but we'll love you. Only, watch out for your stepmother.
The seventh advised her.
Remember not to let anyone in."
The days passed happily. Snow White made breakfast for the dwarfs and then waved them off to work and got on with her tiny chores. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, her evil stepmother lived happily, certain that she was again the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. But then one morning she questioned the mirror and it replied, "Here in the castle your beauty is unmatched, but deep in the forest lives the fairest maid in all the land." The queen realized the huntsman had tricked her and that Snow White was still alive. Shaking with anger, she decided to resort to the magic powers which had been given to her by the powerful fairy who had given her the mirror. She changed herself into a hunched and wrinkled old woman and went to the house of the 7 dwarfs. When she was close by, she started to shout,
"Beautiful wares, wares to buy."
Snow White, who suspected nothing, approached the hunched old woman.
"Look at these beautiful ribbons, my child,"
said the old woman.
"I have just the one to suit you perfectly."
She placed the ribbon around Snow White's waist and pulled so tightly that the young girl fell to the ground as if she were dead. That evening, the 7 dwarfs came home and found Snow White lying on the grass, so still they thought she must be dead. They lifted her up, and when they saw the ribbon they cut it quickly, and Snow White came to life. She told them what had happened.
"That old woman was none other than your stepmother,"
they exclaimed.
"We told you not to trust anyone."
In the meantime, having just reached the castle, the queen hurried to question her mirror, which replied, "Here in the castle, O queen, your beauty is unmatched, but deep in the forest lives the fairest maid in all the land." queen was livid with rage, but immediately came up with another evil trick. She disguised herself as an old widow and poisoned a comb. She walked up to the home of the 7 dwarfs and tricked Snow White into opening the door. "Ah, I am alone in the world," she said, "and I haven't eaten in 3 days." Snow White gave her something to eat and drink, and even suggested that she rest there, but the widow refused. "I must go," she said, "but let me give you a present." Snow White did not want to accept, but the old widow insisted. "You have been so good to me that I want to give you this comb as a present. Allow me to place it in your hair." Snow White lowered her head, and the malicious woman drove it into her hair with all her might. When the dwarfs returned home, they found her lying unconscious on the ground. They hurried to revive her, and when they saw the comb, they took it out and threw it away. Snow White opened her eyes, and the dwarfs were quick to warn her again about her evil stepmother.
It's time to turn over to side 2.